Hi, this is Mr. Wartsky again, and today we're going to talk about photosynthesis. Actually, probably do it in a series of screencasts. Remember, if you need to pause the video and then write down the notes, you can always rewind, and if you have any questions, you can either ask me or take a look at your textbook. It's a good textbook. So we're going to introduce photosynthesis by talking about cyanobacteria. And cyanobacteria are bacterial prokaryotes that could photosynthesize. And since they could photosynthesize, they changed the planet. Photosynthesis uses sunlight and inorganic carbon dioxide, inorganic source of carbon, and water to produce organic compounds, specifically glucose. Now, that glucose was then used to produce energy to keep organisms alive. When we talk about sunlight, we need to remember that the light is made up of three colors, red, green, and blue. And we put them all together, we get white light. Kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? Pigments, their job is to absorb sunlight, and different pigments absorb different light wavelengths, and then will reflect the rest back to your eye. So if something is green, or if a pigment is green, it will absorb the red and blue and reflect the green back to you, so that's what you see. If something has red pigment, it absorbs green and blue light and reflects the red back to your eyes. If something is white, it reflects all the light back to you. And if something is black, it absorbs all the light and reflects nothing back to you. That's what I set up there. Beautiful, isn't it? Now, the main pigment in photosynthesis is chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Now, B plays a smaller role. Chlorophyll A is the main pigment. Now, chlorophyll A and B are very similar, just a slight shape change, and they are green. Carotenoids are known as accessory pigments, and they too will absorb sunlight, but they're often found in smaller numbers. Though they have pigments that are red, orange, and yellow. Now, there are usually so many more chlorophyll molecules than carotenoids that they hide or mask the carotenoids. Then, when that plant dies, the chlorophyll molecules or pigments are the first to break down and allows the carotenoids to be expressed for the first time ever. And that happens to leaves in the fall and fruit when apples go from green to red or bananas go from green to yellow or oranges go from green to orange. I know there are some green apples that go from green to green, and that's really confusing, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Right? So when you see a nice red fruit, and remember that is a decomposing ovary. More about that when we talk about plants. The chloroplast is the organelle necessary for photosynthesis, and it contains chlorophyll in association with thylakoids. I'm going to show you what thylakoids are in a moment. There are 200 to 300 chlorophyll molecules found within the thylakoid. In addition, there are your carotenoids and other proteins within that thylakoid. Now, thylakoids can form stacks, and those stacks are stacks called a granum. A stack is a granum. Many stacks would be a grana. And between the thylakoids, you find stroma, or the cytoplasm of the chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast, you'll also find a nucleoid of DNA and ribosomes that resemble prokaryotic ribosomes. In the middle of the thylakoid, kind of resembles a donut, is an inner space. So we have here a picture of a chloroplast, which you might want to get this down. We have a stack, which is called a granum. So this is a thylakoid, one of these things here. And inside the thylakoid is a space. We have that membrane, is a very thin membrane there, and that thin membrane contains the chlorophyll as well as proteins. So just draw the main things of this chloroplast that should be in your notes. I should ask for a drawing of that tomorrow. So the relationship between chlorophyll, the thylakoids, and the chloroplasts, what do they do? The thylakoids contain the chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll absorbs the light. And the chloroplast will take that light, take water, and inorganic carbon from CO2 to produce glucose and oxygen. So we have the chloroplast is here, We have a thylakoid stack. A thylakoid membrane goes in a circle. In the thylakoid membrane, you find these chlorophyll molecules. And the chlorophyll molecules will absorb sunlight. Now, when they absorb sunlight, sorry about that, chlorophyll molecules get excited. So they absorb a specific wavelength, they get excited, and when that happens, the chlorophyll molecules will vibrate back and forth, and then eventually a chlorophyll molecule will lose electrons, and that will start the whole process off. So there are two parts to photosynthesis. We have the light dependent, which requires light. We also call that the light reaction. And the light independent, which does not require light, so we call that the dark reaction. It can happen in the presence of light. It doesn't need light, no worries. There are two types of chlorophyll, the light antenna, which absorbs sunlight, and the reaction center, which loses electrons. So there are two chlorophylls. There's one set that absorbs a light wavelength of 680 nanometers, and there is another which absorbs a light wavelength of 700 nanometers, slightly different colors. And here's the picture again. So we have different types of chlorophyll. They pass along the energy, and one will lose electron. What is going on here? Electron. So what happens in the light reaction? That's what we're going to start with. We're going to start off with light of 680 nanometers will be absorbed by chlorophyll in the photosystem 680 or P680. P stands for photosystem. As the chlorophyll absorbs the light, it will become excited and start to vibrate. And the vibrates will be passed from chlorophyll to chlorophyll until the vibrations reach the reaction center. When the reaction center absorbs the energy from all those vibrating chlorophyll molecules, it will lose 2 electrons to a higher energy level. And those electrons are caught by a protein that are found in the membrane, and that protein is called plastoquinone, or PQ. And we have here, the photon of light is exciting. The energy is being passed. It hits the reaction center here, and 2 electrons are lost to a higher energy level. And that does that again. That's really annoying. So the plastoquinone, or PQ, will take 2 hydrogen ions from the stroma. Remember, that's the cytoplasm around the thylakoid. And when it takes the 2 hydrogen ions, it becomes PQH2. The PQH2 will pass 2 electrons to cytochrome complex, which is another protein, and the 2 hydrogen ions will move from the stroma into the inner space, and we are going to talk about what happens to them later. The cytochrome passes 2 electrons to plastocyanin, and then the PC will pass those 2 electrons to photosystem 700 reaction center. Now this is called an electron transport chain because all they're doing is they're undergoing reduction oxidation reactions or redox reactions by accepting 2 electrons and passing 2 electrons on to the next protein. That's what an electron chain does. Accepts electrons, passes electrons. Now a consequence of that is the movement of hydrogen ions. For example, PQH2 move, or PQ move plastoquinone, moves the hydrogen ions from the stroma to the inner space. And we have a diagram here, which you could do here. This is the P680, loses 2 electrons to PQ, becomes PQH2, so it's 2 hydrogen ions over here. PQ passes into a cytochrome complex, which dumps the hydrogen ions in here, passes to PC, which passes it to P700. It's a good picture. When the proteins, it's called electron transport chain, I got that. Now there's a problem in that the P680 will eventually run out of electrons. Oh no! There has to be a system to replace the electrons lost by the excitement of P680. And there is. Water moves into the inner space through osmosis, and there is a protein, and that protein has a really complicated name. It's called Z. Will tear down water in a series of reactions and tears down water into 4 hydrogen ions, which we'll talk about in a moment, 4 electrons, which go to the P680, and 2 oxygen molecules will enter the atmosphere and allow us to breathe. So we get our oxygen from the tearing down of water to produce 4 electrons for P680. Meanwhile, the light antenna of photosystem 700 will absorb a light wavelength of 700 nanometers and vibrate. The chlorophyll molecule will vibrate and pass the energy to the reaction center. The reaction center will lose 2 electrons, the 2 electrons they got from the electron transport chain, to a higher energy level. The 2 electrons, and that should be 2 electrons, will be caught by a protein called ferredoxin. Ferredoxin. That is ferredoxin. It's a new cheer. Ferredoxin will pass those 2 electrons to a molecule of NADP, which is an electron carrier. They take the 2 electrons and a hydrogen ion from the stroma to form NADPH, and that is in the stroma, ready for the dark reaction. It goes to the dark side. NADP is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. It is an electron carrier that undergoes redox reaction. In the enzyme NADP reductase will add the electrons as well as the hydrogen ion to NADP. It is similar to NAD, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is also an electron carrier, but that is found in respiration. Okay, so when a molecule receives electrons, it becomes energized. When it loses electrons, it loses energy. And once again, here is the light-dependent reaction. And we know from here to here, where this is photosystem 700, passes the ferredoxin, which passes it to NADP, which becomes NADPH. Meanwhile, we have the hydrogen ions from the tearing down of water by Z over here, as well as the movement of the hydrogen ions from the stroma to the inner space. Okay, we're going to stop there in a light-dependent reaction. If you have questions, you can refer to your textbook, watch the video over again. It's a great time. And you can ask me tomorrow. I'm sure I'll be more than happy to help you.